all the soil. And people believe that some parts are contaminated and some parts are not contaminated. But with the Weyerhaeuser company, they think this would be too much effort to find what part is which. And so it'd be better from their viewpoint to just go through the whole area and clean it out. And some of the most important sites, like the 1833 site, the 1843 site, and this quality nation, those are preserved. But the real question is, just like these outstations, there's a lot out there we don't even know. And many archaeologists, historians believe that there needs to be more survey work done to see what's there before it's destroyed forever. And so there is an effort to have the impact statement changed so that it would require more mitigation. In the impact statement, it mentions that the bulldozer drivers will be trained in archaeology. And that as they dig through they see something, they will stop. And I've heard a joke. One person said, well, what we should do is spread the rumor that there's gold buried out there. You do see some very careful drivers, But seriously, the thing is, without systematical study, we don't know what's out there. And once it's gone, it's gone. And so many people are encouraging the Weyerhaeuser company that, maybe they go ahead with the golf course, but before they do that, they need to be more careful.
What area does the Silicon tribe associate themselves with?
The thing about tribes is that it's a contemporary term, but the Steilacoom tribe is associated with the area of Steilacoom. And to be more specific, it's so hard to do a territorial definition of tribes. I mean, it's the question, is Olympia Nisqually or Squaxin? It's probably both, because when the reservation systems were set up, Indians from that area went to both reservations. It tends to be more Squaxin than Nisqually. So to say exactly where the Steilacoom tribe was, it's hard to say, honestly. I think one thing would be to detect and do some archaeological survey and determine some of the prehistoric sites there, so you can kind of identify and match with that.
You mentioned that the primary sites at Northwest Landing were being saved, like the fort site, the mission, and the second fort.
Yes.
Are those areas that were also contaminated?
No.
Or not?
Well, the thing is, no. 1843 site was not contaminated. The 1833 site is a touchy question because we know from historical records that all around 1833 site, there probably would be another Nisqually village, both Native American and Euro-American. The 1833, the Palisade lines, that is not contaminated. We don't know what's beyond a little bit. Now I know in the environmental impact statement, they talk about preserving 61 feet or 66 feet around the perimeter. No one knows if that's far enough or not. I mean, it's just guesswork. The mission site is a tricky question because that site has been known for many years. It's been marked since 1906 by the DuPont Company, but when the toxic waste cleanup started, waste was dumped on top of the site. And there was a plastic level in between the two, but the waste was put right on top. We don't think seepage occurred. We do know that some bulldozing has occurred on that site. We don't know how much. So that site might have been damaged. I think the question is, if a site's really contaminated, it's hard to do excavation, but we don't know what areas are really contaminated. Among the DuPont people, there's a lot of concern about some of the old DuPont buildings from the company. There's still some standing buildings, some dating back to 1912. The thought is many of those buildings are not contaminated, but according to the current plan, all those buildings will be razed to the ground and then the ground dug up. I guess it's more economical to go straight through and just do everything at once.
The site that was down at the beach on the bay, the railroad has gone through there years and years and years ago. Has that site been covered over, or is it still there?
That site is not threatened by the current development. It was damaged by the railroad. According to the reports I've seen, there are still some intact portions of that site, and it's both Native American village site, and it's also Hudson's Bay Company, the first building was down there
So
too.
there's kind of a little delta at the bottom of that creek. And then, of course, there's a dike
Yeah.
because of the railroad. Now, is that site on the south side of the creek where it's kind of a delta area? Because
I haven't been to the site myself. I know it's on the south side of Sequoia.
okay. Knowing, I've been there a number of times, but knowing the topography, that's the only place that seems logical.
Yeah.
Yet I didn't know whether or not, there used to be a wharf there in the early days that went out to the ships. And I think the bay slopes off rather rapidly, so they didn't have to go very far. But I never knew the location of where the early fort was.
Yeah, that would be the 1832 place. I'm not sure. I think it's on the south side.
What actual year did they start there? Now, I've always heard 1833.
Okay. The current thinking is that the Hudson's Bay Company, a party of company employees going from Fort Vancouver up to Fort Langley, stopped in 1832, established a temporary residence. And then when the Journal of Occurrences starts, the official records, it was 1833. They came back and they commenced, they were there a little bit, and then they moved upland. But it's really 1832 that the first operation started. And records are pretty skimpy then, but that's
Now, did the fort itself have a separate cemetery? Heath was buried in 1849. Was it, did the fort at that time have their own separate
Yeah,
cemetery, or was it part of the mission?
okay, no, it was not part of the mission.
Is that right in the protected site now?
Yeah, in 1843 site, well, that's a complicated question. In 1843 site, which is protected, it's owned by the Archaeological Conservancy. Attached to it is a protected site that's fenced off, that is a cemetery. It's the site of the 1843 cemetery. Weyerhaeuser Company has gone through and found graves as we buried people in that cemetery. There are some accounts that maybe not everyone quite made it to that cemetery, but I'm not sure on that. Outside the 1833 fort, there was also a cemetery. That has not been completely found, I don't think. And there's also probably other cemeteries in the area too. I mean, people lived in that area for thousands of years, and then for Euro-American for hundreds of years. So the 1843 cemetery is protected. 1833, I'm not so sure about.
The Sequoia Indians had tree burials to the north side of Sequoia Creek in the woods.
Partially, but with Euro-American influence, they were burying, there has been Native American burials found out there that were in cedar boxes. Still traditional burials, but in the ground. It might have been Catholic missionaries or something.
Some years ago, I read in one of the Tolney journals, I think it was Tolney's, at least it was Fort Nisqually Journal, that they had a dinner party at Fort Nisqually, at which one of the guests was Ulysses S. Grant. Now, that would have been about 1852, and I haven't any idea where I got when I read that.
Yeah. Grant is a slippery person because down I mean, he became so famous later, you know, during the Civil War, president. But in the 1850s, he was basically a failure. I mean, he had very difficult time with it. And down in Vancouver Barracks, for example, they have a place called the Grant House. That it was real famous. This is where Grant lived. Then later they found, well, Grant probably never lived there. It's possible he came out here, but he would have been just a junior officer. Records are not.
Well, he was quartermaster for the district, so undoubtedly he came up.
Yeah.
And the other report I had that he was here was that Runquist, the horseshoer, shot his horse before Grant rode back to Fort Vancouver.
Yeah.
So I had those two notations that Grant was here, but I have been unable to find the one about where, I guess it was Dr. Tolney entertaining the dinner.
I have to look into that. I don't
I
know.
hope you can.
Yeah.
some of the journals are missing, aren't they?
Yes. Yeah, many of the thing is the Fort Nisqually, the Hudson's Bay Company, kept really good records. And that's because it was British efficiency. All the records they made copies, they sent back to London. These were preserved in the archives, which just recently, probably in the 1970s, were brought to Canada, to Manitoba. But the thing is, in the 1860s, when they're negotiating the agreement between the U.S. government and the company for buying out their land, a lot of records were gathered for the court trial, or for the investigation. Some of those disappeared, and we don't know where they are. Some of the records are down at the Huntington Library in California. But there's a period of time that the journal's missing, and then also, when they wrote these records, they would say things like, yes, 15 sheep were sheared of their wool today. But they wouldn't mention the details that we want to know today. They wouldn't say who was visiting sometimes if he wasn't considered very important. I mean, it's not as complete as you wish it to be. But I guess we're lucky to have anything.
One entry I love is about Lithlow, I think, where one day it said, rounded up wild horses. The next day, rode wild horses. Third day, delivered them to muck. Ooh.
Yeah, it's when you read a journal, it's a whole different sense of life. It's in a way, some of the company employees stayed here. There's still descendants in this area, but with the flood tide of American immigration, it really was overwhelmed. One area I've always been interested in is the Cowlitz Farm, in which there was a group of French Canadians, and there was a map drawn of the land claims that the French Canadians drew. And it was done, they did the claims just like they did up in Quebec, with a long strip of land going down to the river. Yeah, it's a time that's really gone.
Now tell them about Simon Plamondon.
Okay, sorry, Plamondon. Plamondon is a really interesting character. He probably lived for about, close to 100 years, 1800, 1900. And he, let's say, early in the 19th century, the Northwest Company had a major confrontation, some of their Iroquois employees, with the Cowlitz Indians. And so that area was up where Cowlitz River went up, and Cowlitz Landing near Toledo. And so the Cowlitz Indians basically kept the fur traders out. In 1818, Simon Plamondon went up there, and he married the daughter of the chief, Cowlitz chief. And he established friendly relations with the tribe, and so the Euro-American fur traders started coming up. Plamondon was associated with the area till when he died. He was French-Canadian. He became kind of a patriarch for the area. He was a strong Roman Catholic. He was influential for having Catholic priests come to Cowlitz, and there still is a Catholic presence down there, Mission. He was an interesting character, and there was this kind of well-connected, small French-Canadian community that he was involved in.
You missed one of the spectacular things about him.
What was it?
He had over 14 wives, and at last count he had 84 children.
Not at the same time, the wife.
No, the wives didn't seem to live very long, but the Cowlitz tribe now is principally his descendants, as I gather.
Many of them are. The thing about that, in reading about different people, a lot of the women died during childbirth. It was a very hazardous thing.
If not from childbirth, from infection shortly
Yeah.
after.
And then if they were Native American, there was all these epidemics coming through too. It was very destructive for Native Americans.
Was there any immigration from the sea other than the Hawaiians coming over?
Okay, well, the thing is, some people believe that it wasn't all Hawaiians. It could have been other Polynesians too. Even Tahiti.